The idea to establish Shalom really emerged when I was doing a master's on peace studies and international relations, and it was linked to my experience going back to the genocide in Rwanda in 1994 and coordinating SMA pastoral care between 1995 and 1998, and then engaging in Lodwar diocese, northern Kenya, from 1997 onwards. So in those environments, I became very conscious of the amount of people that are killed and maimed and displaced during conflict. And it came to me that in those environments, in those situations, that it's very difficult for social and religious values or gospel values like peace, truth, justice and mercy to take deep root. Very difficult for people to live normal lives or experience through peace. And secondly, in those environments, it's extremely difficult to have any sustainable development because periodically schools and hospitals and formation centres and general infrastructure gets destroyed. And are we going to forever be pouring money into dealing with the symptoms as distinct from addressing the underlying root causes? Of course, you need to deal with both in conflict environments. So that was the rationale and the motive. And all of Shalom is oriented towards reconciliation between people, reconciliation with the divine, among humankind, with yourself, and of course with the general environment creation that we have been gifted with from our Lord God. Well, I get great satisfaction because this is very much in line with my call in life to bring that peace, harmony, reconciliation to humankind, and also to help people to be the agents of their own future of interdependent coexistence, to have moved from violence to peace. And of course, when you see families living in peaceful environments and where their children have a better future, you realize that it's so important, in line with, we say, the Brundtland philosophy, that all of us should not interfere with the present resources to the extent that it will really diminish the possibilities for future generations. Well, the first challenge actually is to really insert yourself among the communities that are engaged in violence. They're ethnic communities, so Shalom mainly deals with issues of interethnic conflict, religious ideological extremism, and other areas of violence, particularly in the slums, the violence done to women and children, and that can range from interethnic violence to cultural violence like female genital mutilation, FNG, sexual violence of many sorts, and other forms of domestic violence. But to insert yourself and be trusted. So as Shalom engages in these conflict environments, the first thing that's important to do is to be trusted, that our team is trusted. So we need to insert, we need to identify in those environments the key influential opinion shapers that should be trained and engaged in transforming their own conflicts to situations of peace. And for example, in the interethnic conflicts, you're looking to engage with chiefs, elders, religious leaders, teachers, men and women group leaders, and some of the warriors. And one should never be daunted by the level of education you meet among these communities, because while education may be sparse, there's no shortage of intelligence, and it's really about empowering them to be the architects of their own future. And that insertion is very important, and of course then to engage them in the process where you're training them with analytical skills on what's causing the conflict, mainly from three different paradigms. One is realism, and realism is always about how is power operational in the conflict environments, because realism is about achieving or attaining your interests and securities, and of course this pervades all conflict throughout the world. If you cannot achieve it by positive manipulative persuasion, you revert then so often to threats and then sanctions, and the last resort is coercion. And then to move and to look at how much the role of structural violence, the lack of institutions to help people meet their basic human needs and actualize their potential, how the lack of these institutions are contributing to the causes of conflicts and its persistence. And it's so important to understand those 2 points, what's causing the conflict and why it is persisting, because you have to look then at the institutions that are not stepping up to the mark in terms of addressing the underlying causes of conflict. And so much of development work can be just about dealing with humanitarian aid and just addressing the symptoms, whereas Shalom is really focused on addressing the underlying causes, and to look at the environments then, and particularly for search paradigm, how the environments can be positively manipulated in terms of communication, leadership, bringing people together to understand perceptions and misperceptions, because there's more than enough in all of these environments to meet everybody's need. To use the phrase, there's enough to meet their needs, but not to meet their greed. And it's really making it a win-win for everybody. But some of these environments are very dangerous where we work, and like there's probably 2 to 3 guns per families in some of the environments, AK-47s or G3s. So you can imagine you have to tread softly as you move among them and to build the trust. But I have never met a parent, and really I've never met a leader up there either, community leader, whether it be an elder or a chief, that doesn't want a better future for their children. And it's the most natural thing in the world. Now, then, to address the issue of religious ideological extremism, we go into the slums here around Nairobi, and Al-Shabaab is a big problem here in East Africa, and cells, and we know now that the influence of Al-Shabaab and like-minded organizations have spread down into Tanzania, particularly in the southeast of the country and northern Mozambique. And we have to engage, and that's much more sensitive, and we have to be very careful as we do it, because your own life is also in danger. But you really have to turn the dialogue into praxis. And Shalom really is grounded in bringing about diapraxis, not just the dialogue, but the practice where both communities begin to work together for a common vision and have a common aim of development as well. So that is really helping them to develop tolerance toward each other, to counter fundamentalism, to counter non-violent extremism, because if you don't counter those, they can easily develop into manifest violent extremism operationalized in terrorism. We work with the main stakeholders, and first of all, we work in environments which have governance structures of any state. So not only are we entering into those environments, we are invited. First and foremost, we are invited. We are legitimate actors, and many of the areas where we work, the government administrations ask us to actually bring training to some of their officers, whether it be chiefs or administrative or the police, and we have done a lot of work with the institutions of law and order in this country, particularly coming up to election violence, which has been a sad feature of elections here in the past, but getting better. As you know, back in 2008, over 1,200 people were killed, 60,000 maimed, and maybe the best part of 1 million displaced. The exact number is debated between 500,000 and 1 million. But we have continually worked on that, and so you work with them. The other big actor you'll find in a lot of the environments are the various religious institutions, and especially when you go up into northern Kenya. So you find that churches have been fantastic at helping people, particularly in the educational and medical. But there are very, very few people qualified in the religious institutions, in these dioceses, what we call within the Catholic Church, who have really got highly qualified in the areas of conflict, transformation, peace building. And we have a large number of justice and peace departments that are really crying out for more skilled actors in terms of analytical skills and peace-building techniques. So we've been working a lot with the various religions, Christian and Muslim and some Hindu, but particularly one of the main actors up is the Catholic Church up in northern Kenya, and so we've been really working on helping them to, the famous word, capacity build on this, and but also addressing those environment issues of radicalization and extremism at the SMA, which is the conference of Episcopal conferences here in Eastern Africa, at their last assembly in Addis Ababa at the United Nations Centre. So I addressed a lot of these issues and have been really asking development organisations, and indeed some Catholic ones, to really begin to sponsor, because if we don't do that, it's like the people coming from the top telling the people at the lower end what to do. But we have to begin to help them to be architects of their future. I feel the government of Kenya are really supporting us, and I mean, not just the government of Kenya, but the 8 countries of IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and we have worked with them very closely, and they gave us a very high recommendation recently for UN accreditation. And of course all that is on our web, and the whole history of Shalom is on our web, and including from the SMA fathers going back to the great endorsement we received and the consultation that was done on the ground here with apostolic communities in Nairobi area and up in Turkana, then with the bishops, and of course the universities as well reached out to us to help. So at this moment we provide a course on conflict resolution and reconciliation in Tangaza, and I am also on the council of that, and we're trying to further this whole aspect of studies on peace building. So in that regard we are part and parcel with the government in many institutions, because of course even the university like Tangaza is under the Commission of University Education. But we have found a great welcome. So there's a big difference, you see, Dominic, of going into environments and pointing fingers and saying you're useless and you're doing nothing, as distinct from going in and seeing wonderful people who are just waiting to be activated. And of course in the process they are growing themselves as human beings, and now they're reaching out to the community. And those 4 values of peace, truth, justice and mercy are at the core of the message of the Gospels, and indeed of many, many religions throughout the world. Yeah, well, I have, Dominic, I have a number of success stories, but it'll take a while to tell them. But just as to address that, first of all, our success is grounded on research, really, at the very foundation. Because if you don't know the causes of the problem, you could be like, talking to yourself in the mirror. And so our research department is very strong. And then, leading from that, a wonderful success is the empowerment we have given to thousands of people on the ground, really raised them to a very high level in terms of their ability to analyse and to bring about the conflict transformation. I mean, one of the great success stories was referred to at the European Council of Ministers on Development, and that was up between the Turkana and the Samburu, and just south of Lake Turkana, where they've been at violence well into the last century. But through the process with them and really giving them the credit, we are really just enabling them, empowering them. They were able to get a ceasefire. The next thing, they agreed to open a road 26 kilometers between them, then to develop a joint market. And I think there's 4 inter-ethnic, inter-religious schools that Shalom has been funding operational in that environment. Now, that's one aspect. The issue of dealing with the religious ideological extremism, one of the success has been to be able to insert ourselves to the cutting edge, and I hate using that word but you know what I'm saying, in the sense of really getting down to where the problems and the cells that need to be addressed to counter religious ideological violence. So that has been very important. In terms of election violence, I think one of the great success stories happened at Isiola, and where we brought I think 17 Christian leaders and 18 or 19 Muslim leaders into a forum together to prevent election violence. And it was just great. We trained them, and one of my great memories of that day was just beginning that workshop with them and making a special request to them that they would, at the opening prayer, that they would begin to pray for each other, but that there was a particular prayer that they wanted to pray for the well-being of the other community. And they weren't just looking at each other and wondering, how can we make them Muslim or how can we make them Christian? And so out of that emerged, in a very, very difficult conflict environment, a wonderful committee where it became very operational in the run-up to the elections. And very happy to say that in that environment there was no killing or maiming or displacement around the issue of election violence. But Dominic, we are working in, I think, 28 and 20 very difficult conflict environments. So there's been a huge success story in terms of the institutions that have been agreed on by the various conflict communities. So going back to 2019, here on the wall you'll see we made 226 interventions. Now these aren't just fly-by-night one-day workshops. These are 3-day workshops followed up in a couple of months and so on. And out of that emerged 64 jointly agreed projects which are really owned. And all we do is supply cement and steel. They have to provide sand, water, stone, labour, so that when it's up and running, whether it be predominantly we're working with school projects because education is so important, but also with the clinics and some other projects, that they own the project. So that is a great success on the overall level. Out of all of those interventions. Now we were, like, in some sense it was more difficult last year because of COVID, and we had to be conscious that we weren't enabling the spread of COVID, so we were very, very conscious. But so we diverted somewhat to help, and I think around 30 medical centres with COVID supplies. But you couldn't neglect either the piecework, so we worked as much as we could with the leaders in those conflict environments. And I stress again, the leaders don't mean just political leaders. These sometimes are chiefs, elders, religious men and women, and some of the warriors. So a lot has been achieved in that time. With them, that we were able to help bring about 60 projects that are really benchmarked by peace and moving towards reconciliation. It's so important that we know that continuum between tolerance and how that can move to fundamentalism. And if we don't address then how that moves to non-violent extremism and eventually ends up sometimes in manifest violent extremism, not just here in Africa. We even see it happening in democracies. And if we look at the world in general, you're looking at issues of where you have the polarization of politics, polarization of the media, polarization of religion, where they have moved so far apart. And even though you may have negative peace, that can easily revert back to manifest violence. And we've seen incidences of that all around the world.